Hey, welcome back, fellow fans of Mastery Vibes, Peer Support Unleashed. You've got, me, Robyn Priest, Charlotte Armstrong, the fabulous business partner, and we have a super cool guest today. Well, I think they're pretty cool. Will MacPherson from Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, for those who aren't in Canada. Will, you wanted to come and chat with us, and I really just want to throw it to you and let you cut loose and say whatever you want, and we'll cut you off if you're annoying, but I won't. I don't believe you will be.
I'm looking forward to getting cut off, Robyn. I have a background in battle rap, so cutting me off could be a little bit challenging, but I believe you could do it. I Before I get into peer-led initiatives and mention how we know each other, is it okay if I share an anecdote? Because this perfectly sums up for me my spiritual beliefs about peer support, and it is how I started my first public talk about my own mental health.
Absolutely, go for it.
So the year I was born, there was a West African shaman traveling to the States to train to be a medical doctor. This was I won't say when because my age is a secret. It was a long time ago. And he went to different insane asylums.
Oh,
And after a while, he brought the doctors together and he lamented. He said, "What have you done? What you call mental illness is spirit knocking on the door. It is the birth of a healer. And if you don't shepherd that person through the dark night of the soul so they can become an embodied healer through, the lineage, through practice, through their own self-healing, because that's the training, then spirit is going to find more people and knock on their doors." And so when I see the proliferation of mental illness in Western society, sure, I know about all the toxins and the bad programming and this and that. I know there's very complex causality, but on the spiritual level, on the purest level, I believe that these are healers trying to be born who don't have a culture that holds them, nurtures them, and allows them to become what they're meant to be.
it's really interesting you said that for many reasons. I worked in Guam a few years ago, and I was working with someone who's Chamorro, like native to Guam, and they said that their grandmother, when they were little and they were 5 and they were hearing and seeing things other people didn't, and they've now been labeled with schizophrenia, of course, talked about their grandmother said to them, "You were born a breached baby and you are a healer, and you will see and hear things your whole life, and you get to choose which of those voices and those others that you see that you listen to." And I was chatting with someone the other day who's a peer worker, and they talked about before they had any of their experiences, mental health adventures, whatever we want to call them, they had gone to a sweat lodge and had seen things in the sweat lodge. And the person who ran the sweat lodge said, "Oh, you're just that spirit talking to you." And then it wasn't, it was a few years later, they started having different experiences, and the Western world diagnosed them with schizophrenia. But they went and chatted with that same like elder who said, "Oh, that just means spirit's too open for you at the moment." So I was just saying that, like, one of the things for me, I think across time, across cultures, there are so many experiences of spirituality speaking. And if, I've even had conversations with other friends who are like, I think when people are coming down from drugs or dealing with their mental health and seeing and hearing things, there's just that thin veil between universes or spiritual places that they're able to access. So it's, some people might believe us, Will, and some people will be like, what? But hey, we each get to determine it for themselves. So didn't know you were going to start with that, but loved it. So I'll throw it back to you, mate.
Okay. I want to briefly just say how we know each other because I was the first locally based harm reduction peer support worker on Salt Spring. And Robyn, you are my favorite, best teacher in a professional role as a teacher. And it was so in alignment because I had these feelings going in about the mastery vibes. I believe peer support unleashes power and magic when we do it the right way, which means that we know we're called to do it. All my clients on Salt Spring quickly realized that I was there as a human first, and very, not even secondary, but tertiary was the professional role, which I still did my best to upkeep. Um, and you've actually come to Salt Spring and we've all hung out and we did a giant training with the mental health game where you accumulate diagnoses. I quit that game in real life at the hospital after 6 diagnoses, none of which were ADHD or autism, which I actually have. But as you well know, Robyn, people can play that game in real life and develop 10, 20, 30 diagnoses. And I
Yeah.
think that's a failure of the system because mental illness is not an objective reality. You cannot test me for bipolar disorder. They're syndromes, right? They are clusters of symptoms that people study at university and make mental maps. And those mental maps, those diagnoses, are as useful to the client, to the person, as they are. They could be very useful because they help you navigate them the way other people have navigated them. And I am all for them helping. Some people do great with medication. But I love the saying, don't confuse the map with the territory. And if I was crossing Canada for the first time, I would not want to do it with a really good map. I would want to cross Canada with somebody who already knows the territory and can just take me through. And I think ideally in our world, our kind of capitalist colonial world, lived experienced context experts working with academically trained content experts often lead to the best result. But if you've been hurt by the system like I was, and I think you were, Robyn, people ask me, are you diagnosed for autism and ADHD? And I'm like, no. My entire life, I had iatrogenic disease caused by doctors. And so while I may eventually get a diagnosis, the last thing I'm looking for is validation from a doctor who gave me Paxil because I was depressed and anxious. And then when I got manic, didn't realize it was the Paxil that they'd given to a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
Gonna have a sip of water.
Hey, Charlotte, what have you got to say on what Will's been talking about so far? I'm excited by Will, but I'd love to hear from that family perspective.
Well, when you were talking, both you and Robyn, when you were talking about what the shaman said and then what the grandmothers said, and we see this on the family side that often that label is, oh, they're too sensitive or they're an empath or they can't be around too many people, and some have said there's too much energy in the room and they don't know how to manage it. Or they walk in the room and somebody's giving off a vibe that they just can't manage at the moment. And so some families really understand that, but then some families make that person the scapegoat, the one that's always the bad kid or the troublemaker, because they just don't fit into that family. And again, family is whatever family is to the people in front of us, but I think that there is some truth behind that if you're able to open up those biases or your brain and think about it. But no, I believe what you're saying. I do.
I also, so I had a spontaneous spiritual awakening on January 4th, 2017. I'm not suggesting anybody do this, but I was working with plant medicine. I went to the spirit world. I had a complete life review. And then I had the long dark night of my soul as I realized that all my foibles, the ego and hubris, the shadows and cloaks that I used to hide myself. And so it has taken me from then till now to feel grounded and in balance. And one of the things I think people get lost in when people discover spirituality or have visions, it's so exciting and it feels like this veil is lifted. But we still need to ground that spirituality in our culture and in our 3D reality. And so I am finally at the place where, like, I'm not going around talking about this with people who don't want to talk about it. I am focused on embodying unconditional love in a boundaried way with people who aren't, friends or family, and just taking care of my family, taking care of my friends, serving my community. I think I see the mistake that I made, that a lot of people make, is wanting to get so lost in this spirit and these plant medicines and these visions and the work of integrating to the point where you don't care if you share any of this with anybody because you're just living it in an embodied way. And like my first focus is taking care of my partner and then my family and then my two communities. And so I think I don't want to ever behave in a way where I am sabotaging my own ability to support someone because I'm acting like, oh, I'm the spiritual one. It's like, I believe we all are, but my beliefs are not relevant to supporting you. What's relevant is me asking you, how can I best support you?
It's such a simple question, isn't it? But what do you do, Will, if someone says, I don't know? Because sometimes people have never thought about that. They've never been asked that question.
Well, I operate under the assumption that my best way to support somebody is for them to be and say whoever they are and whatever comes out. So I'm thrilled with I don't know. I'm like, that makes total sense. I spent years in active addiction with mental illness, heavily medicated. I had no idea what would support me, and I find with each person, intuitions, little bubble ups of things to say. But one of the things I love about peer support is that I might say, are you interested in something that supported me? And I usually would have an intuition that this might be something that supported them. And I think peer support done very well has such an important nuance that a lot of people I used to work for didn't understand. Yes, I share. Yes, I personally disclose, but I never did it for my own needs. And you have to have self-awareness to understand when you want to share because you want to share about you. And when you're sharing something because you feel based on this person connecting with you, that this is something that might serve them. And then I'm like, if it doesn't, throw it out. A lot of the time when those conversations happen, I say what I said earlier about mental illness diagnoses. Because I meet a lot of people who are marginalized, they're impoverished, they don't have secure housing, they've got a lot of trauma, they don't have a lot of secure attachments. And I mean, in that situation, how do you get, sorry, I feel a little bit lost for words. I know it when I do it. It's interesting because peer support, I'm not a professional frontline worker anymore. And it's great because now I can be the peer support worker I always was, but I don't have management being concerned about how I'm doing it. But peer support is the mental health role, the fastest growing mental health profession where you get permission to be yourself.
Yeah.
And I think I got this good medicine hoodie on for a reason. One of the mental wellness initiative's new projects that I'm helping spearhead, but it's a collective creating it, is a simple podcast like this. And initially it will be on Zoom because it's the easiest to produce. And the podcast is called People Are Medicine. It's very easy. We practice a culture of care, and it's very easy for people to say these things, right? I think one of the unfortunate things in our world is quote unquote wisdom has been spoken repeatedly by people who are not living it. And it makes people think that it's nonsense, it's BS, and they become cynical. Wisdom can only be embodied. And when we're embodied with the wisdom, then the words we use, they translate, and I'm amazed at how many of the former clients I used to serve, they knew they were the wounded healers who were meant to be healers. They knew that also the artists, right? High in personality trait openness, means we're absorbing all the energy around us. This isn't woo-woo energy. This is the 5 big psychological personality traits, which is the most rigorous psychological science there is. And artists absorb everything around them, and the art that they create is just them like spewing it back out because we can't hold on to it.
So tell us a little more about the, people are medicine.
So initially, I will be hosting the podcast because that is something I enjoy and I am comfortable doing. I like speaking extemporaneously. I've done a lot of facilitation. And the thing I love about facilitating is we don't front load curriculum. You're not the instructor. You ask questions. You learn so much more if someone asks you a question than tells you the answer.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing a beautiful intro. My uncle's got this beautiful song I have permission to use. I'm learning how to do audio editing just so it sounds a little better. But my great aspiration, the great hope for it, is that somebody that I not interview, but someone I have a conversation with on the podcast might be interested in being a podcast host in the future. And so that we can uplift a diversity of voices and have a diversity of conversations, because just like a peer support worker and a client, there are emergent properties, sometimes magic ones, that happen when 2 people connect and cohere their energy. Or in alignment, or have mirror neurons firing if you want to use scientific language. And so my great hope is to start this and to be a bridge. I was the kind of, when COVID struck, I knew mental illness was just going to go crazy. And so I'm like, it's time. I need to share my voice publicly. And so I went to Ask Salt Spring outside. There was like 40 people, mostly seniors who were scared. And so I shared about myself, and they were like, oh my God, you're so courageous. Look at you. And I'm like, no, I am not. I'm a large cisgendered white man who looks like in a certain way that is not scary. I knew all of you were going to celebrate me. I knew it. And so there's no courage involved in that. What takes courage is when you're wearing your trauma and your struggles, and when you look in a way that our culture, it may be racism, it may be other kinds of, but when you have a risk, that takes real courage. And so my desire is to initiate this and then support people and mentor them in how to do it. At that Ask Salt Spring meeting, all these old folks, and I totally validated their experience, and I felt much concerned. They were scared. Not just all they saw was what was on the news and what they see in town. And at that time, we had a lot of people who were homeless or insecurely housed, intoxicated. There was a lot of yelling. It's much better now. So I asked them, I'm like, simple question. Do you know what the difference is between me and someone in town, drunk, dysregulated, probably homeless, and yelling? I'd already explained all my mental illnesses, right? So I figured this is a pretty easy question. Nobody could guess. So I told them, there's only one difference between me and them. My life and my recovery is built on a mountain of privilege. And I'm standing on top of that mountaintop. And so my job is to make the case to you that the people you think are causing you problems are actually the ones who have this incredible healing, connective, artistic value for our culture, but they're going to need to be taken care of. Because my parents, they took care of me and put up with endless problems that I generated. My better half, Verena, good God, the amount of grace she's had to show me so I could get here, it's care. People would ask me, they're like, how are you getting people to go to treatment? And I'm like, well, easy, I'm not. I have no interest in someone going to treatment. For all I know, the best choice they can make in their life situation is self-medicating. I self-medicated for half my life, if not more, and it got me through. But the thing is when people realize that the peer support worker isn't judging and actually has no agenda to get them into detox, then they feel safe. And then some of the time they're like, after a while, they're like, you know what? I'd really like to go to detox and treatment. And it's like, okay, cool. That's awesome. Let's make that happen.
Look, it's so simple, right? To just be there. I was saying on a different podcast. It's about being human and a human connection with each other. Hey, Charlotte, what you got with Will's chat?
Well, you know, I was thinking that we should do another video where it's you and Will talking, and then maybe I can have a chat with your parents and your partner, because we would have been going through, like, I remember when you know, my daughter was really struggling, the stuff that I was going through, trying to hold it together to support her. So I would imagine they've got a few stories as well, because it is hard, and we never want to give up, right? And as you were talking and you talked about that privilege, it's the privilege of having people that care about you, that will support you, to support you as you're trying to figure it out. And often people are missing that support network too.
Yeah, I also, you know, the privilege of knowing that if I ever got to this point, that I would be able to do what I want in the world. Like, one of the things I took the most pride in being a peer support worker is I said to the clients were like, you know, I'd really like to do that. And I'm like, yeah, and one day you could. There's a lot of work we got to do first, you know? But yeah, like this is the aspiration, like my vision for our like computer digital AI future. They're like, there's no jobs. I'm like, oh, yes, there is. We need 1 million support workers, right? This needs to be part of our culture. I had this clinician that I respected so much that I worked with at the beginning of my career as a peer support worker. And I respect them so much, but I don't agree with them about everything. And they said to me one day, because I'd gone to school for 2 years in psychology, and I was top of my class, and I was actually designing research in my second year. I was going to be credited, go to a conference in Florida, all expenses paid, be a big deal academic in my second year, and have everything set. And they said to me, you know, have you thought about going back to school so that you can do that deeper trauma work with clients? And I said, you know, I wanted to respect them, right? So I was like, you know, I don't think it's my path to go back to school, but I'll always keep it as an option. What I didn't say, because I knew they would find it triggering, is that when I do trauma work with a client, there is no deeper trauma work. There isn't, because I know how to hold space, because I know what I needed, because I understand what they've been through. And because I've been through it, just like a clinical counselor, I also understood some people's trauma was so much. When they asked if we could open it up, I'd say, no, we can talk about the little piece, and then we need to stop, because your trauma is so great that we can't create a safe container for you, unfortunately. But I just always, I mean, this person was so great, but I just thought, oh man, you know, we have a lot of, what I would like to see is peer support workers, especially leaders in the field like Robyn, not creating curriculum, but creating processes where peer support workers can move up in credentials, but a different form of credential process. So that you could be a peer support worker like you are a clinical counselor with a master's, or you are a peer support worker like you are with somebody with a doctorate. Because I am a science nerd. It's one of my autistic special interests. So I may not have a degree, but I am up on all that stuff. And, you know, I incorporate it. But the transformational potential of two beings being their full selves, when one of those beings isn't getting that opportunity to be held that way, when I had a client know that there was nothing they could say or do that would make me think less of them, like nothing. You know, and I remember when I started, right? Because of how I look, people were kind of like, what? And they'd be like, I don't know if I want to talk to you. And I'd be like, totally okay, but can I share something? And they'd be like, okay, yeah. And I was like, between 16 and 20, I was abusing substances, and I had diagnoses of anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorders coexisting with narcissistic personality disorder. And then I gave up on the system. And they're like, oh, you get it. And I'm like, yeah, dude. And then you just watch them like so tense, like, oh.
It is
like...
that piece, isn't it? It's that piece you were talking before about coming with no agenda, no judgment. You can tell me whatever. It's the piece about, I'm not going to dig in deep into your trauma. That's not my role. My role is to be here. I'll listen to you. But there's other people that are going to dig into your trauma if that's where you want to go. But that piece of people feeling, and I always say this on the podcast, feeling seen, heard, and validated for who they are, their experiences, and like peer support. I would love to see it everywhere. I would love to be able to go into a library and there's a peer supporter there, or like wherever. I don't know. Maybe there's peer supporters in bars hanging out too. Woo, I don't know. But it's that place of, it's that human connection that can support people to choose freely for themselves. So we show up as our authentic selves as peer supporters, and we hold a space that supports people to be able to show up as their authentic self without having to hide stuff or not tell stuff. And that allows people the space to work out what they want for themselves, right? That self-determination is that big value. And maybe someone's using coping strategies that someone else doesn't like, but it's getting that person through something in that moment. And then, as you said, we don't try and get people into treatment or services, but you watch people explore and then decide for themselves. And the research says when peer support is available, people do engage in services differently and maybe choose different options purely because they're not made to or pushed to, or I'm not trying to get something from the person. So, look, Will, I love our discussion today. I think there will be times where we'll have others, and I just appreciate your candidness. You use some big words, and my brain goes, what do they mean? But as you said, you're the nerd, and I'm not. So, I'm going to go back and listen to this, and some of the words are going to be like, what was that? What did that? I'm going to look them up. But anything as a closing, and then I'll throw to Charlotte to close us out for this convo.
Yeah, one thing in closing. So I had an intuition about this, but I had such low self-esteem as a neurodivergent person who didn't have my value recognized. It would have taken me years to figure out what I just said to you. But I didn't have to, Robyn, because you taught me. And you were embodied in your authenticity and you were having fun and you taught me. And I was like, mind blown. And so I just think like it's so valuable. Like it's great to figure this out eventually on our own, but like we don't need to reinvent the world. And you in your training empowered me to model this in the world and to spread it. And I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Will. Like, I just want people to be able to go after their dreams, and I think everyone can. Some of us will get there, some of us won't, but thank you for saying that. That means a lot, and we didn't pay him for that. I
No.
want to be super.
Actually,
I didn't know it was coming.
I got to be greedy. I got one more thing to say. For one of our new projects where we're getting interns, we're going to have lived experience honorariums for people who want to participate and learn. However, for these, we're going to say that everybody has lived experience because the truth is that, in my opinion, healing and living your best life is exactly what we're talking about. It's about being able to be authentic. And because our culture has taught people not to do that, people who seem well adjusted to our culture, it's quite a lot of trauma out there, quite a lot of intergenerational trauma, quite a lot of cultural trauma. And so I really want to invite people who haven't accumulated 5 or more diagnoses. Like, I think this is about, you can call it comes from indigenous teachings. Like, you can call it decolonizing, right? You can call it being relational rather than transactional. But I think these lessons apply to everyone, which would make sense if we're the healers. That would make sense that we'd have a lesson that would help.
Absolutely. Charlotte, close this out. What do you got?
Well, as you were talking and everyone has lived experience, absolutely what you were saying, and not everyone has the courage to share their lived experience. And I think that's what makes us as peer workers, I'm going to call us special, because we do have a gift of sharing our story, and we do want to make a difference with people. And thanks, Will, for hanging out with Robyn and I the last little bit, and keep in touch. We want to have you back on because we want to hear how the world out west is going for you, and especially your project that you're working on.
Hey, I just want to jump in a little. I think everyone has lived experience of lots of different things. I want to put a little distinction in there about peer workers working in healthcare settings and stuff. I think there's a piece about Dr. Louise Byrne wrote about it from Australia, that the lived experience we want for those positions are individuals who've had their lives interrupted by their lived experience. I think lots of people have lived experience about, well, everyone, about something, but I just want to put that little blurb in there because I don't want to water down peer support in healthcare settings and different places by saying everyone does, because sometimes we have to like challenge people who are like, but I've got lived experience, but it hasn't significantly impacted their lives. So I just want to clarify that for everyone listening.
Thank you, Robyn. I totally agree. Thank you.
100%.
Well, we'll see you all next time. And if you've got suggestions, reach out to us. Let us know because we're up for a good chat. See you soon.